collaboration with the Cyprus Mail, this is the Cyprus News Digest with Rosie Haralambous.
On this week's programme, as Greek Cypriots with property in the north reportedly sell their seafront hotels to a Turkish Cypriot businessman, are, after 50 years of fruitless negotiations, the chickens coming home to roost in Cyprus.
Public buildings started being restored in an effort to give utilities to the area. Now, all these to me show that there is a plan of action from the Turkish side which would lead up to the opening up of the fenced up area. Unfortunately, our side did not take this seriously and did not prepare for this eventuality.
And on a lighter note, next weekend sees a spring festival at one of our most famous wetlands.
So there's all sorts of activities for children and adults through which they can get to know the area, its wildlife, and its importance for wildlife.
The headlines have been pretty well awash so far this week, with the knowledge that some Greek Cypriots have apparently sold their properties in Varosha to a Turkish Cypriot businessman. It's not quite clear who yet, or indeed who the Greek Cypriot owners of these hotels and apartments are. It's something that I think a lot of us have expected over the years, with no solution in sight to our Cyprus problem. Joining us on this week's programme is Nicosia lawyer Achilleas Dimitriadis, who's been dealing with this issue and indeed property in the north for many, many years. Achilleas, you've expected this, I think, did you not?
Yes, it was. Well, thank you very much for having this interview. And yes, unfortunately, I was expecting it. I mean, during the campaign, this was something I had actually predicted that was going to happen. And indeed, it has happened in the sense that the people that are buying these properties have made a statement to the effect that in 2 years' time, that is in 2025, they are expecting tourists to be accommodated at these properties. So the big picture is that Varosha is apparently going to open, and hence Turkish Cypriot businessman is buying up Greek Cypriot properties in order to take advantage of this. And the second question is, what are we going to do about it? Because we are obviously unprepared as Greek Cypriot community. Nobody thought that this was actually going to happen, and there is no plan of action, and that is very sad and alarming.
Can you give us a little bit of a background about Varosha? Because it's a bit different from the rest of the occupied areas, isn't it?
Yes, you're absolutely right. Varosha has had a number of Security Council resolutions which deal with its status. And its status is different to other areas in the occupied part of Cyprus because the United Nations has decided that this area, what is downtown Varosha, should be returned to the UN and be part of the UN buffer zone. And in that area, the owners, the Greek Cypriot owners, should be allowed to return. These resolutions were, of course, never put into effect, and the city was, or that part of the city was essentially frozen. What had happened was that there is a certain part of it, I think 2 or 3 blocks of flats, which have always been used by the Turkish army as residences of Turkish officers. But in June 2019, there were statements to the effect that Varosha would be opening up for Greek Cypriots to visit, and eventually it would have been opened up for settlement. Our side, unfortunately, did not take them very seriously. Then we had in October of 2020, Mr. Erdogan did his picnic in the rain, if you remember. So he visited an area which was opened up especially for this, and there was a big fiesta on TV about opening up Varosha. And then we had in July of 2021 statements by the Turkish side to the effect that about 3.5% of Varosha would be opening up for settlement, and in fact that they were fixing a mosque and therefore were using the services to have access to it. And then in May of 22, King George, that's a landmark hotel on the beachfront. The beach in front of it and to its right was opened up. And last but not least, public buildings started being restored in an effort to give utilities to the area. Now, all these to me show that there is a plan of action from the Turkish side which would lead up to the opening up of the fenced-up area. Unfortunately, our side did not take this seriously and did not prepare for this eventuality.
Well, it seems odd to me that with all of this history, and you and I have talked about it many times, that the relevant governments of the day, and we're going back over several governments, haven't taken it seriously. What's the role of the Immovable Property Commission in the North in all of this?
Yeah, well, the Immovable Property Commission is a Turkish commission established after a decision of the European Court of Human Rights. The court said that this commission is something which is not contrary to the convention, even though it reserved the right to consider how effective it's operating. So the decision is not yet taken about its effectiveness, but it is clear that it is a Turkish remedy and that it has been approved by the European Court. Now, why would somebody apply to the Immovable Property Commission? Well, as we may have said before, according to the Turkish Cypriot side, or the Turkish side for that matter, all Greek Cypriot properties in the north, allegedly abandoned in 1974, became the property of the subordinate local administration. So if you want to claim your land, you need to apply to the IPC, take your Republic of Cyprus certificates of ownership, and establish that in 74 you or your ancestor was the owner, and therefore the commission should, depending on what you ask, give you back your property, pay you compensation for the loss of use, or even buy up the property if it is being used by others. There is also the possibility of exchange, but that is not really applicable under the circumstances. A lot of people have gone, about 7,500 if I'm not mistaken. There have been settlements to the tune of 1,250, again if I'm not mistaken, which were worth about 380 million sterling. Of this, about 250 million have been paid, and then there is a balance which is expected to be paid. These are sales that have been made by Greek Cypriots to the administration. So the administration over there has purchased it, and the Greek Cypriot has got the money. What we are facing now is something different, and that is individual Turkish Cypriots, businessmen for this matter, are asking Greek Cypriots to sell their properties to them in the fenced-up area. Now, this is a completely new development that we haven't had before, and my take on this is because Turkish Cypriots or the Turkish side knows or knows about plans for the opening up of the city, and therefore are going in to jump the queue and take over these properties, buy them, so that when it does open, they are in a position to develop and accept tourists who would like to visit.
Why has the IPC or the authorities you mentioned that have already paid out for other properties not just sold them on to other Turkish Cypriots?
Oh, they give them to Turkish Cypriots, and there's been a row for some time over the occupied areas as to who pays for this. And my understanding is lately there's been a special tax which has been imposed on sales to non-Cypriots or third country nationals. And part of that tax is being used to finance the IPC. The IPC's biggest problem, its ineffectiveness, is that it doesn't have the money to pay what it has agreed, and it doesn't have the money to compensate. So it's coming up with other ideas of trying to settle these matters, and restitution, that is the return of the property to the Greek Cypriot owner, is now on the cards. The question is whether the Greek Cypriot owner wants to go and live in the occupied areas. And that is a big personal question and a big political question that I am afraid has not been discussed in order to take a view as a community.
Am I understanding you to say that if I've put in my claim to the IPC and I can see that they won't be paying me or can't be paying me, then I really have to go and live in the occupied areas in my property?
No, you don't have to go and live. It's an option. It's whether you want to go and live. I mean, take Mr. Skouridis, who has now passed away. He was from Larnagas Kizilabithu, and he had some property over there. In fact, he had a home, which some Turkish Cypriots, if I'm not mistaken, had taken over. Yet he went to the IPC. He claimed restitution for his other properties. He got back a piece of land. He built his house there. He went and lived there and eventually passed away in his village. So it all depends what people want to do. The IPC is an option. It's not a necessity. If you want to apply and try and get your property back or try to get compensation or want to sell it to the Turkish state, you can apply, but that is not obligatory. You can wait to see what the result of the negotiations on the Cyprus problem are and then decide what to do. Both lines are equally acceptable. I'm not advancing either of them. I am simply putting there the options for people to consider. Because at the end of the day, human rights is the right to choose. And the fact that we can choose one or the other is what human rights is all about.
Well, it seems extraordinary to me that the reaction to these sales has been what it has been, with a lot of people actually blaming the owners of these properties for selling up. And yet, if we look at the way that the solution negotiations have been going for how many years now, well, you can't really blame them, can you?
No, not really. I think the Republic of Cyprus has not done much to deal with the properties of Greek Cypriots in the occupied areas. One idea was that a fund would be set up in order to buy these properties at the ridiculously low prices that they're being sold, so that they help these Greek Cypriots who obviously sell their property at such a low price because they have an economic need. I mean, if the bank's going to repossess your home because you haven't paid the mortgage and you have 10 or 15 properties in the occupied areas, you are going to go and sell them because you want to save your home. I mean, that's pretty basic, I would have thought. But unfortunately, the Cyprus government and successive governments of all parties actually have not given enough assistance to Greek Cypriot owners in order to avoid them having to go and sell their properties. And hence we have these sales that have attracted publicity. And in a way, the fact that this publicity was generated is perhaps the last opportunity we have to get our act together as to A, decide what we want, and B, put a plan in operation.
What's the role of the government authorities in this? If I want to sell a property, wherever it is in Cyprus, do I not have to have that sale rubber stamped by the land registry or somebody?
Oh yes, I mean normally, or if you want to go by the book or according to the law or international law, if you want to sell a property that is in the land registration of the Republic of Cyprus, that is how you go about in doing it. You register your contract with the land registration, and once the price is paid, the transfer is effected. But we are now operating in an abnormal situation where the Republic of Cyprus does not have control over the occupied areas, and therefore it is impossible, if not very difficult, for the government to keep track of what is going on in the occupied areas. On the other hand, you have the administration in the occupied areas, which currently runs the show and leases out properties, buys or sells, And it is under that administration that this procedure is taking place. So these contracts that have been signed, apparently, relate to what is going on in the occupied areas and have to do with how people treat property on that part of the island.
So, just a minute, does that mean that if push comes to shove, our land registry in the Republic of Cyprus could turn around and say, we don't recognise this sale?
Well, I don't think the Land Registration Office of the Republic of Cyprus will be given notice of this transaction. It's only when the Cyprus problem is solved that there will be a reconciliation of who sold what before the solution and whether this sale is valid after the solution. But in the meantime, people are trying to find shortcuts in an effort to survive economically and proceed. And that is why I come back to the point that the Cyprus government would be well advised to set up a fund to assist these people, and they can issue a bond in order to finance it and buy these properties in. Or if we go by the pre-election promises that at least one candidate was making, there were 300 million euros of excess of an amount which could have been given in order to lower taxes as a pre-election promise. Well, if 300 billion is around, then why don't we use it in order to help the owners of properties in the occupied areas? But if this money is not around because this was a pre-election thing, then the government can issue a bond and can use these properties, which it will buy, as collateral for this bond. So there are ways to finance it. The question is there a will?
The other question is, what will happen next? Because if other people who own properties, particularly along the seafront, which does seem almost inevitably about to be opened up to tourism in the next couple of years, then they're going to surely jump on the bandwagon too, aren't they?
Oh, absolutely. And this is the tragic development for the Cyprus problem, because for the Greek Cypriot side, sorting out Famagusta was step one. And if Famagusta was not sorted out, in that it would be returned to the UN or the Greek Cypriots, then there was no point in starting the process for solving the Cyprus problem. So I am very concerned that this development will essentially become a bar to any real efforts to solve the Cyprus problem, because the attraction of the return of the fenced-up area of Famagusta will, according to what we read, evaporate.
Will it have an effect on the whole of the property issue, not just in Varosha, if we do come to the table again?
Varosha is the test case. I think Varosha is the test case. And it is the test case because it is an area where nobody is using the property. That was the oddity of Varosha. It was a city that was hostage, it was a city that was not being used, and it was a city that did not have a current user, whereas the rest of the occupied areas, with the exception of military zones, were actually given to various people through various ways. Varosha is different because there is no current user. There is no competing interest for someone who will claim, well, I've been living in this house for 35 years. Why are you now moving me out when you left this property in 74? Will be the argument. And I won't go into the legality of this. I'm merely observing or identifying this difference and trying to make sense of what is going on.
You're, I think, very familiar with many of the property owners in that area of Varosha. Have you managed to ask them their feelings about this and whether it's changed their perceptions?
Oh, feelings in general, not just in Varosha, are mixed. There are the ones who are absolutely fed up and want to find a solution and get on with their lives. And there are others who want to solve the Cyprus problem and use Varosha as the triggering mechanism to start the process of solving the problem. What is correct, I don't know. And of course there are the others who will say, don't do that, it's treason, and what are you thinking of doing? This is the worst thing that could happen, and create all kinds of bad feeling about it. I'm not saying one or the other is right or wrong. I am saying there is a need for a public discussion, an honest public discussion as to what our options are and where do we want to go. If we decide that, then we will have to decide on the means in order to achieve the goal we have set. But moving the goalposts every time doesn't really solve the problem.
It certainly doesn't, and we can't surely be looking forward to another 30 years or more of stale negotiations.
I don't plan to be around, so I don't know about others. But if that's the kind of time frame you're looking at, I think a lot of people will not buy that anymore. We're approaching the 50-year mark, and that has the consequences that everyone can understand. So yes, the situation is critical in the sense that we have perhaps the last opportunity to take a real view as to what is happening and perhaps take the right or, for that matter, the wrong decisions.
Achilleas Dimitriades, lawyer who's well versed in the property situation in the occupied areas. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you very much.
This is the Cyprus News Digest with Rosie Haralambous.
Well, spring is definitely in the air, and we're going to talk about birds, because upcoming on the 13th and 14th of May is the Akrotiri Spring Festival. Joining us to tell us about it from BirdLife Cyprus, it's welcome back to the programme to Elena Markitani. Elena, tell us about this spring festival. It's happening, I think, at the Akrotiri Environmental Education Centre.
Yes, that's right. The Akrotiri Spring Festival is actually happening on the whole of Akrotiri Peninsula. So there will be various locations within the peninsula where we'll have activities for both young and old, so that the public can get to know and enjoy this important site for birds and biodiversity.
So what's going to be happening? Because if it's running over 2 days, I guess there are all sorts of different activities.
Yes, that's right. It's a 2-day festival, and we'll be starting from 9 in the morning on the Saturday with bird ringing demonstrations. Then a bird watching tour will follow. There will be documentary screenings, various workshops for children and families, and craft activities, basketry workshop, hiking at the Apollo Highlights Trail. So there's all sorts of activities for children and adults through which they can get to know the area, its wildlife, and it's important for wildlife. Some of these activities require pre-registration as places are filling up fast, so we encourage the public to learn more about this event, and if they're interested in joining, they should register to the activities that are interested in joining.
Right, now I'm assuming that the kids who take part in this get really interested if they've never been on something like this before. What's the reaction you get from children?
A very positive one, I must say. It's really rewarding and heartwarming to see families and children being so enthusiastic about our island's nature, about the birds that are here in Cyprus, and we can all enjoy through a visit at Akrotiri Peninsula, and specifically Akrotiri Marsh especially. It's a wonderful site to visit. Even in the summer months, this area is still green because it's a marsh, so there's lots of animals using the site. There's Cyprus cattle grazing freely at the marsh. There's donkeys and lots of wild birds for people to enjoy from a close distance.
Because you've got hides and things there, haven't you? Interesting that you mentioned the cows. I read a really interesting article. I didn't realise that we had Cypriot cows, which were different from the usual dairy cows, and that they roam and keep that area, well, as it should be, I suppose, because they're part of the ecosystem. Tell me a bit about the Darwin Plus project. I believe that that's what this is being organised under, as it were, within the framework.
Yes, exactly. So this event is part of a project funded by Darwin Plus. So it's a 3-year project that aims to restore important wildlife habitats within the Cyprus SPAs. So in this case, that would be Akrotiri Peninsula as well as Cape Bila. So we'll be focusing on restoring the area as well as promoting it. And this is why we're organizing this event so that people can come to this area and visit it all year round, because it's so rich in nature and wildlife. Each season of the year offers something else to the visitor. So this is our aim, for people to get to know the area and respect it and want to protect it and get to know it better.
You talk about protecting it. This is an area which is under threat, I think, isn't it, from the developments nearby? How is that going?
Well, there's been some unfortunate development on the SPA boundaries of Akrotiri Peninsula, which we have been very vocal about and have raised the alarm numerous times. We're keeping an eye on the whole of Peninsula, and we'll definitely raise the alarm if anything that's going to jeopardize this precious habitat falls under our attention again.
But it already has to some degree, hasn't it, with the building that's gone on very close to the wetland. Have you been able to reverse any of those negative things to ensure that the animals, and indeed the insects, they're just as important, that use the area are going to be protected?
Well, it's still early to say what exactly will happen. We know that there have been some habitat loss from that development, which will affect specific birds of prey, like the red-footed falcon that has been using the area for feeding. So it's still early to know the full impact of the development, but we are always in communication with the relevant authorities, in this case the SPA Environment Department, as well as the Republic's Environment Department, to make sure that any mitigation measures are being seen through to offset any habitat loss and what that entails for.
Am I right in thinking that the Akrotiri wetland is actually a protected area? Is it Natura 2000?
It's the equivalent, because it falls within the SPAs. It's the equivalent of a Natura 2000 site, yes. So the whole of the peninsula is protected.
Well, it's a chance for people to go and see more, and it's fascinating to see that it's not just, as you said, the bird ringing demonstrations and the bird watching from the hides, but lots of fun educational games and crafts for families, hiking, basketry workshops, and much, much more. You said that people have to register for some of these events, so where should they go to make sure they do that in time? Because it's not too far away, is it, the 13th and 14th of May?
Yes, so there's a new website that's just been set up to promote the whole of Akrotiri Peninsula, and that is visitakrotiri.cy. So people can learn more about the area and the festival through this website, as well as through our social media pages. If they look us up on Facebook or Instagram by searching BirdLife Cyprus, they can find out more details through our Facebook page as well.
And as far as I'm aware, the best thing of all, it's free.
Exactly, yeah.
So it's not going to dent people's pockets. They can go and have a fabulous weekend. The kids will love it. And hopefully, at the same time, there will be some fundraising things going on, if maybe they're selling stuff, so that you can support the plans to try and maintain this very precious habitat. Elena Markidani from BirdLife Cyprus will send people to visit akrotiri.cy and hope that the places fill up to the brim. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Rosie.
Well, that about wraps up this edition of the Cyprus News Digest. Many thanks for your company. Hope you'll join me next week. Till we meet again, take care and God bless. Bye-bye now.